Hey guys, we'll just wait a couple minutes for everyone to get in here. I see 9 of you so far, so we'll just wait a few more minutes. I'm just going to open one thing here. Get rid of that. And I just want one more thing I need to show you guys, and then we're I think, all right, this might be all of us. And there we go. All right, so I'm going to just slide this over. Give myself a bigger screen here. All right, and we should hear people as they slowly enter. So right now we have nine of you guys. Just double check on the chat here. Can you guys hear me? Okay. I will assume Carly is speaking for everyone. Okay. Yeah, no worries, Ethan. That's fine. Yep, perfect. Okay. So a couple of things we're going to do today. We're going to finish off talking about the heart, and then we'll go through a couple of administrative things. So why don't I talk about the administrative things first? It's really weird having to just look at your webcam, but okay. First of all, what do we have here? I just want to remind you guys, my office hours are from 10 to 12, and I'll do that every day except for the weekends. Outside the office hours, please feel free to email me, because if I have time, I can enter a Zoom session with you to tutor you anyway. But those will just be kind of general, where I'm sitting around waiting for the ding of the Zoom. Our next Zoom session will be Friday at exactly the same time, so 9:15 to 10 a.m. If 9:15 doesn't work for you and you want to join my other classes Zoom, you're welcome to do that. It doesn't matter. The material is going to be essentially the same, but I need to do it both times to accommodate for those who have conflicting schedules. All right. All right. So a couple of things coming up. First of all, just one second here. There we go. First of all, we have your heart assignment number 1 is due today at noon. So make sure that that comes into me. I see a lot of you have already turned that in. One interesting thing that I've been learning as I've been playing with Google Classroom is that you can add things to Google Classroom, turn stuff in basically any format. So you can turn it in as a PDF, you can turn it in as a JPEG. So it's easier for me if you turn it in through Google Classroom. If you're not sure how to do that, there's like a million videos online in order to do that. But that's probably the easiest way to do it. But you're losing no marks if you email it to me. So if emailing is just easier for you, I'd do that. But eventually, I'd like everyone to get into being able to turn in through Google Classroom. Okay. Next, we have first aid quiz is done. It's ready to go. So I have this on Moodle, and it'll be available to you from 6 p.m. Everything I'm telling you right now will go in a stream to Google Classroom later today. But from 6 p.m. today until 6 p.m. on Friday is your first aid test. You have 90 minutes to complete the test. So that means you don't start the test until you know for sure you have 90 solid minutes to do it. It's 80 multiple choice questions. I don't think anyone will take longer than half an hour, but it is open for 90 minutes. Feel free to use your textbook for first aid. That's just fine. And yeah, and then I will have that marked for you. So that's another thing to let you know. First aid booklets, as you all know, are due by the end of the day, 11:59 on Friday. So some of you have handed yours in already. And again, different formats. You can take pictures of every single page and send them to me. You can scan it into a PDF if you don't have, but some of you don't have access to something like that. Whatever works best for you. The assignments are all listed in Google Classroom. So don't wait till 11 o'clock to tell me you don't have a booklet on Friday. Okay, you've had lots of notice about this. There will be a heart number 2 worksheet posted at the end of the day today, and that'll be due Friday as well. And you will have a quiz on the heart, but the heart quiz won't be until after spring break. So I'll open it up in the morning on the Monday after spring break, and you'll have till the Wednesday to do it. But again, all of this administrative stuff I will share with you on my Google Classroom stream. Okay? Any questions about any of the administrative stuff before we move on? Okay, not seeing any questions there. I'm going to move on. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to share, I added something to our last PowerPoint. So I just want to share that with you. So on, let me just go like this. Slideshow from current slide. So on slide number 26, I've added a couple of web links. Here's what I would recommend, and maybe do this over spring break as you're preparing for the heart quiz. But what I would recommend for this is, if we can see my little spotlight tool here, I would recommend doing this little quiz here. It's just a drag and drop quick quiz, dragging all the different parts of the heart that you need to know. So that's a good tool for studying. This one here, we're going to try to watch right now. And what it's showing is just the heart pumping. And I don't know how this is going to work, so we're just going to give it a shot and see if we can make this go. And I think in order to do that, I have to share all my windows. So we'll just try that. And click on this. Okay, I'm just going to pause. Okay, before we continue with this, I just want you to send me a quick chat and tell me whether or not you actually can see the video. Okay. All right. Thank you guys. I wasn't sure if that was going to work, so I might have to play with that a little bit more. Okay, so that's one thing that you'll have to watch from home. So you have 2 videos. They're linked right in there on slide 26 in the PowerPoint. So if you could watch those 2 video or watch the one video and then do the drag and drop activity, which is that web link to a quiz. Okay. And I will see how we can watch these a little bit later. I need to play with this a bit more. All right, so let's go into PowerPoint number 2, which is here. Okay, so we are doing our second set of notes on the heart. And I just need to open this up and just one quick second here from current slide. Okay. All right, just give me a quick chat if you can see this saying the heart too. Okay, perfect. All right, at least that's working. Okay, so we're going to go into our second part of the heart. So we're going to finish off the heart. On Friday, we'll start talking about blood vessels, but your quiz that'll be after spring break will be just on the heart. Okay. All right. So first thing we need to talk about is our circuits. So we have pulmonary circuits. So we have 2 different circuits. So the first circuit we're going to talk about is the pulmonary circuit. Okay. So our pulmonary circuit, this pulmonary, and on the chat, if you could just, let me just see if I can quickly open that. Nope. On the chat, if you could just remind me, what does that word pulmonary mean? When I say pulmonary, what am I talking about? Good. All right, so pulmonary is referring to lungs. So when we were talking about the pulmonary circuit, what that means is we're talking about the blood flow from the heart to the lungs and then from the lungs back to the heart. Okay, so that's our pulmonary circuit. So there's two circuits that we need to talk about, and that's the first one. Okay, so with our pulmonary circuit, what happens is our heart pumps deoxygenated blood. And again, I colored that in blue just to remind us that this is the one that's lost its oxygen. It's not actually blue, it's just a darker red color. And it gets pumped to the lungs, and then at the lungs, it can become oxygenated. Okay. The deoxygenated blood is carried to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. So arteries are blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. Okay. And that's something that's really important for us to understand. So arteries carry blood away from the heart. And then the oxygenated blood is returned to the heart through the pulmonary veins. So really what's happening is we have this deoxygenated blood. So it's lost its oxygen from giving its oxygen to the body. Okay. And that deoxygenated blood goes into the heart, gets pumped out of the heart, goes through the pulmonary arteries where it goes to the lungs. At the lungs, it collects oxygen. So now it is oxygenated blood, and then it leaves the lungs through the pulmonary veins and then goes back to the heart. Okay. All right. So let's look at your chat here. And I have a couple chat questions for you. Okay. So the first one, let me just make this so it's smaller here. Okay. So our first chat question is deoxygenated blood is carried to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. What chamber of the heart pumps the blood into the pulmonary arteries? Okay, so that's the question I want you to answer. What chamber of the heart pumps blood into the pulmonary arteries? Good. All right. Exactly. So it's the right ventricle. So the right ventricle pumps that deoxygenated blood into the pulmonary arteries and now forces that blood towards the lungs. Okay. All right. Oxygenated blood is now going to leave the lungs. So my next question for you is, what chamber of the heart receives the blood from the pulmonary veins? Excellent. So the left atrium receives the blood from the pulmonary veins. Okay. So these types of questions are ones that you want to be able to answer, right? These are showing our understanding of how the heart works. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide here. Okay, so in this slide, we're just going to label. So what we're looking at here is the pulmonary circuit. Okay. And we're going to label the different parts. So we're going to start up here. And what I'm seeing right here at the upper right-hand side, okay, so I see that right here, the upper right-hand side. What I'm looking at is the lung, okay? So I'm trying to remember how I started this process. Actually, I think I started the process down here. So I started this process for my animation down here. So this part right here, okay, is where that deoxygenated blood gets received from the heart. Now, we don't have it labeled on here, but can you tell me the blood vessel that is taking this blood and carrying it to the heart? What's the blood vessel that's carrying the blood to the heart? The deoxygenated blood. Yes. Okay, so that blood vessel is called the vena cava. This one specifically, because it's on the top, is called the superior vena cava. Right. We would have an inferior vena cava here that's moving the blood from the bottom part of the body that's been deoxygenated. Excellent. Okay. So now I have this chamber right here. So what's this chamber called? You can write that in chat. What's this chamber called? Good. So we have the right atrium. And the right atrium is going to pump the blood through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Okay. Now from there, that blood gets forced into these arteries that I see right here. And in these arteries that I see here, if I can get you to type in the chat, what are these arteries called? Okay. So the blood's going from the right ventricle, good, into the pulmonary arteries. Excellent. So now if we look at the top part of the page, those pulmonary arteries are used to carry the blood. Let's make this work here. Pulmonary arteries are used to carry blood to the lungs. So here's my lungs up here. Now, these arteries all branch off into teeny tiny little blood vessels. And those teeny tiny little blood vessels, we can see a whole pack of them right here. So those are teeny tiny little blood vessels. So this deoxygenated blood is traveling to the lungs, and then it's going to break off into all these little teeny blood vessels where oxygen actually gets gained and carbon dioxide gets lost. And that way we can breathe out carbon dioxide, right? So I know we haven't learned this yet, so if you haven't taken Bio 20, you wouldn't know this probably, but any ideas what these teeny tiny little blood vessels are called? Anyone know this? Awesome. Thank you, guys. So these teeny tiny little blood vessels are called capillaries. So capillaries is really the blood vessel where exchange can happen, and we'll talk about those a little bit more as we move on. Okay, so those are called capillaries. Okay, so the capillaries are going to allow for oxygen to be gained by the blood, for carbon dioxide to be lost by the blood. And then the blood is going to flow away from the lungs and back to the heart through these blood vessels. So I see them here and then I see them over here. So can you tell me what I call these blood vessels? Good. So these ones are called pulmonary veins. So they're carrying that oxygenated blood back to the heart. Okay. There we go. There's our pulmonary veins. So now, if I look over here, the pulmonary veins are carrying the blood to the left atrium. The left atrium is going to pump that blood through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Okay. And that is the pulmonary circuit. Simple as that. Okay. So pulmonary circuit is basically the flow of blood between the heart and the lungs. Okay. All right. The next circuit we have to talk about is the systemic circuit. The systemic circuit pumps oxygenated blood to the body where the blood becomes deoxygenated. So all the cells in our body need oxygen and nutrients. So the systemic circuit is responsible for providing that blood for those nutrients. Okay. All right. The oxygenated blood is carried to the body tissue through the aorta. And the deoxygenated blood is returned to the heart through the vena cava. Okay. The inferior, the one below, and the superior, the one above. All right. Okay, so what we're looking at here is we're looking at just a little diagram. Let me just move this here. We're looking at a little diagram here of the systemic circuit. Okay, so with the systemic circuit, what we're seeing is the flow of blood. So we're starting over here with the blood moving from the heart. Okay, so here's the heart. So this is the left side of the heart. So this is the left atrium. Just to remind you guys what we're looking at here. Move this up here so I can see it. So we have the left atrium right here. Oh, my spotlight's not working. There we go. So here's our left atrium, and that's going to pump blood into the left ventricle. And then from the left ventricle, that oxygenated blood gets pumped into this great big giant artery. So I'd like you to tell me what the name is of that great big giant artery. Okay, good. So this great big giant artery is called the aorta. Okay. Now over here, because the aorta has to provide blood to the top part of our body and to the bottom part of our body. So the aorta branches off. So we have the aorta here, and then down here we have what's referred to as the descending aorta, which is going to go to the bottom part of our body. Okay. So we have the aorta and the descending aorta. Okay. And if we look down here, we see that the descending aorta is going to go to our internal organs and to our legs, right? That's the parts that's going to get the oxygen and nutrients. And up here, the head and the arms are going to get the oxygen and the nutrients. Okay. All right. Now over here, we have, after all that blood loses its oxygen and nutrients and gains carbon dioxide, that blood is now going to go back to the heart. So this is the right atrium and the right ventricle. So it's going to enter the right atrium from the top of the body, the head and the arms, through the superior vena cava, and from the bottom of the body, your internal organs and your legs, the inferior vena cava. Okay. All right. So what we're looking at here is just a little summary of both systems. So we have the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. Okay. So in the pulmonary circuit, and I've put a little animation here. So here's what's going on at the lungs. So this is our pulmonary circuit. Oxygen enters the blood, okay, at the lungs, and carbon dioxide leaves the blood at the lungs, right? So from the blood or from the lungs, the blood, it goes to the lungs, and then we can breathe out the carbon dioxide. Okay. The systemic circuit, okay, so that's what we see going on here. The oxygen's leaving the blood to go to all our body tissues, our cells, and carbon dioxide's entering the blood. So that's what these arrows are showing here. And then this is happening, the same thing at the bottom part of the body, right? Oxygen's leaving the blood and carbon dioxide's entering the blood. Okay, so that's it. So that's that's it for that section. So that is the, wonder why that's not working, weird. That is what's going on with the pulmonary and systemic circuits. Any questions? Okay, so we're feeling confident in what the difference is between those two circuits. Give me a yes or a thumbs up or something telling me you feel confident. Okay. Thank you, guys. All right. So now we're going to move on to the cardiac cycle. So what the cardiac cycle is all about. So the cardiac cycle is basically what happens with the heart from one point to the next. So a cardiac cycle is from the point when the heart contracts and then relaxes, and contracts and then relaxes. Now what we know is that there's actually two contractions and two relaxations. The atria, so the right and left atrium, contract, forcing blood into the ventricles. Then the ventricles contract, forcing blood into the arteries. So there's a contract, relax, contract, relax. And that is what a heart cycle is, okay? So that contracting and relaxing takes a little over a second, or a little less than a second rather, when we're resting, so when our heart is at rest. And when we think about that, our resting heart rate's about 70 beats per minute, so that timing makes sense. Okay, a couple of words we need to learn. The first one is called systole. Systole, okay? So systole is referred to, or is, the contraction of the heart muscle. So in general, when we talk about contraction of the heart muscle, we're usually talking about the ventricles, okay? But when we're specifically talking about the atria, we can say atrial systole, And when we're talking specifically about the ventricles, we can say ventricular systole. But usually when we say heart contraction systole, we're talking about when the ventricles are contracting because there's such a great big muscle and they're pushing blood around the body. Okay. Diastole is when the heart muscle is relaxing. Okay. There we go. So relaxation of the heart muscle. So systole is contraction, diastole is relaxation. And again, usually when we just see the word diastole, it's just talking about the heart in general relaxing, but we know that there's always some beating going on, right? Atrial diastole means the atria are relaxing, and ventricular diastole means the ventricles are relaxing. Okay. All right. So now we put this together to talk about the cardiac cycle. So with the cardiac cycle, if we think about the steps of that, the first step is our atria has to fill with blood. Okay. Now remember, we're talking about both the left and the right atrium, or atria. Atria is plural. Left and right atria. So the right atria is going to be getting blood from our vena cava, right? Superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. Our left atrium is going to be getting blood from the pulmonary veins, so that oxygenated blood that's coming from the lungs, okay? But first step, atria is filling with blood. Atrial systole is forcing blood into the ventricles, okay? So they're contracting and they're forcing blood into the ventricles. And remember, those atria are contracting at the same time. Then after they're done contracting, they relax, atrial dystole. And as they're relaxing, they're filling with blood again. Ventricular systole is now those ventricles are contracting and they're forcing the blood into the arteries. So the right ventricle is contracting and it's going to force blood into the pulmonary artery, and the left ventricle is contracting and it's going to force blood into the aorta. Okay. The atrioventricular valves close. So as soon as that ventricles contract, bam, atrioventricular valves close. So the tricuspid valve on the right side and the bicuspid valve on the left side slam shut. Okay, and that prevents the backflow of blood back into the atria. When we're listening for heartbeat, that would be the lub sound. Okay. Then the ventricular diastole occurs, and that's when our semilunar valves slam shut. So as soon as our ventricles relax, semilunar valves close, and that sound is the dub sound of our heart beating. Okay. And the semilunar valves have specific names. So on the right side of the body, it's the pulmonary valve, and on the left side of the body, it's the aortic valve. Okay. So when our heart beats, we have this lub dub, right? Lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. Ventricles contract, lub, relax, dub. Lub, dub, lub, dub, lub, dub. And that sound is all about those the valves closing and opening. Okay. So when we look at this next picture, what we're seeing is, I'm just going to move this to the side here. So what we're seeing is the atria is filling with blood. Okay, so that's diastole, relaxed. So it's relaxed, they're filling with blood, there's no pumping happening. And then the atria rather, okay, so here atria is contracting. So it's forcing the blood. If I look at this picture, it's forcing the blood to go through the tricuspid valve. And over this picture, it's forcing the blood to go through the bicuspid valve into the ventricles. Then we have ventricular systole, where our ventricles are contracting. So blood is being forced into or through the semilunar valves and into the arteries. So over here, it's going through the pulmonary valve, and over here, it's going through the aortic valve. As soon as that contraction happens, these atrioventricular valves close, the tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve close, and that is that lub sound. Okay. Oops. All right, and then we can just look at this little summary here where we have atrial contraction. So these are our sounds. So atrial systole. So the atria are contracting, okay? Ventricular systole, the ventricles are contracting and they're causing the two valves to close. So there's our lub sound. The atrioventricular valves are closing of the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve. And then over here, just going to move that out of my way. Over here, what I see is ventricular systole. So the ventricles are contracting and then they relax. Ventricular diastole. And when they relax, the semilunar valves close as the blood's pushing back on them, right? And this would be the pulmonary valve and this would be the aortic valve. Okay, so to watch how that's going on, here's a YouTube video that you can watch when we're done our class today. Okay, all right, next we have, so our last topic for today is cardiac output. So cardiac output, before we do that, we have to understand what that means. So cardiac output, first we have to talk about heart rate. So what heart rate means is the number of heartbeats per minute. Okay, so if I look at this, just want to draw on here for a second. Per minute, right? So that's our number of heartbeats per minute. So for a person who's resting, it's about 70 beats per minute, okay? And that's sort of a typical, all right? Our heart rate increases with physical activity because our blood needs to get oxygen and nutrients faster. Increases with stress because that's our body's way to accommodate with stress by getting nutrients and oxygen to our cells faster. Stroke volume refers to the volume of blood. So the volume of blood that leaves the ventricles with each heartbeat. So every time the heart beats, how much blood's leaving the ventricles? That's our stroke volume. Okay. All right. So when you have a stronger heart muscle, your stroke volume is more. So if you work out all the time and you're an athlete, you're keeping yourself physically healthy, you have a stronger heart muscle, which means every time that heart beats, it's stronger, more blood gets forced out of the heart. Okay? If you are not an athlete, if you don't do very much other than sit and play video games, then your stroke volume is going to be, your muscle's not as strong, your stroke volume is going to be smaller. Okay? All right, so athletes have a higher stroke volume. Okay, they've got a stronger heart, so higher stroke volume. If you were on the International Space Station, your stroke volume is going to go down because your heart gets weaker because your heart doesn't have to work very hard to pump blood. So when you come back to Earth, you're going to have to do a lot of exercise to increase the capacity of your heart, the strength of that heart muscle. Okay? All right. Okay, so cardiac output, the volume of blood pumped out by the ventricles every minute. Okay, so we want to focus on that every minute. So the average for a male is about 5,000 milliliters a minute or 5 liters every minute. That's what's getting pumped out of our heart. Okay, for the average female, it's about 4.5 liters every minute. So how much blood gets pumped out by our heart every minute is our cardiac output, okay? So cardiac output is our heart rate multiplied by our stroke volume. So if our stroke volume goes up because we're an athlete, then our heart rate goes down. If our stroke volume goes down because we're a couch potato, our heart rate has to go up, okay? All right, so people with the same body mass must have the same cardiac output, okay? So if you have the same body mass, that means we probably have about the same amount of cells, which means all our cells need to be fed with oxygen and nutrients, and all our cells need to get rid of waste, okay? So they require the same amount of blood to go to the same amount of tissues. The difference with people with the same body mass, because the cardiac output is the same, but our stroke volume's not the same, that's going to affect our heart rate, okay? So considering two individuals with the same body mass, stroke volume is higher for the, okay, and I'd like you just to add this on chat, okay? So who do we think the stroke volume would be higher for? The athlete or the couch potato? All right, does anyone want to go off their mic and tell me why it's the athlete? Or turn on their mic and tell me why? All right, you can type and tell me why. Why do you think that? Why would it be the athlete? Yeah, the athlete, their heart muscles are stronger, right? They're more fit. They exercise. So they exercise their heart. The more we exercise a muscle, right, the stronger it gets. Exactly, Carly. The athletes built stronger heart muscle through activity. So the more activity we do, just like lifting weights, the more we exercise the more muscle we have. The more we exercise the heart, the more muscle we have. Okay? So the athlete has a stronger heart muscle. And because it's stronger, the ventricles will pump more blood. Okay? Good. All right, so let's go on to the next slide here. Considering two individuals with the same body mass, resting heart rate is higher for. So who do we think the resting heart rate would be higher for? Okay, the athlete or the couch potato? All right, awesome. So the couch potato is going to have a higher resting heart rate, right? Why? Anyone want to type in a why for me? You can unmute and say it verbally as well. It's up to you. Okay. Jenny says their heart has to work harder to pump the same amount of blood. Exactly, right? Because they still need the same amount of blood. Their cardiac output has to be the same. But our couch potato doesn't have as strong a heart, so the stroke volume is much lower, which means that they have to pump the blood more to get it to the body, or to get the same amount of body to the heart. Right? Heart muscle is weaker, takes longer and more pumps to move the blood. And when we think about that, like our heart starts beating from the time we are the size of a grain of rice. So about 3 weeks after we're conceived. And that little heart has to start beating until the day that we die. And if we have a really low stroke volume because our heart isn't very strong, our heart has to beat more times. If we have a higher stroke volume, our heart doesn't have to work as hard. So the more exercise we get, the better it actually is for our heart because we're not putting as much pressure to work so hard on our heart. Okay? All right, one more question here. All right, so here, based on the following information, who's the athlete? So we notice that the cardiac volume for these two guys is the same, right? So we're assuming they have the same mass. So I'd like you to just write who the athlete is. Okay, thank you, Jenny and Carly. So our athlete in this situation is Lee, and we can see that because Lee, and I'll just put my answer here, he has more heart muscle, he's an athlete, and pumps more blood with each contraction. So we see that his stroke volume is much higher. So we see this much higher stroke volume. Oops, go back here. We see a much higher stroke volume. Why is that not working? There we go. A much higher stroke volume here. Sorry, much higher stroke volume here. There's Lee. And that means his heart doesn't have to pump as many times every minute. So his resting heart rate is actually 50 beats per minute instead of the normal or typical 70 beats per minute. Okay. All right, on the next slide, we're not going to watch this video, but it's a crash course video about the heart. Not a bad idea to watch that just to get a little bit more information about the heart. Okay, so that was my plan for today, is to cover those 3 concepts. Okay, so our 3 concepts that we covered today were looking at the pulmonary and systemic circuits of the body, looking at, I'm missing my second point because I'm tired, but we had to look at our cardiac output, and because I just need to go back because I totally forget. Oh yes, our cardiac cycle. Okay, so those are our 3 ideas for today. I will post a worksheet a little bit later today. I still am on my finishing touches of creating it. Are there any questions before we move on or before we end the session? All right, so all that administrative stuff that I put or talked about at the beginning, all of that I will also post on Google Classroom. So Google Classroom will have most of that stuff and most of the links. Hi, Carly. So second heart sheet will have to be done by noon on Friday. Okay, and I'll put the deadlines in our Google Classroom. All right. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing anything in the chat. This PowerPoint has already been posted on Google Classroom, so you can access that. And have a great rest of the day. Don't forget my office hours are from 10 to 12 every weekday. And we will talk with you again on Friday. And if you have any questions, just email me. All right, have a great day, guys.